Okay, so good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well. And I'm Punya, the current Joint Secretary of Progressive Students Forum at TISS. This is the 10th year anniversary of PSF TISS, in which we have streamlined several events and programs for the 10th year anniversary. We are conducting 3 lecture series as a part of PSF's 10th year anniversary program. The first lecture series is titled as the history and role of people's movement in India, within which we have conducted lectures on agrarian, students and trade union movement in India by prominent speakers. So this is an introductory lecture series to make people aware of the people's movement in India under the circumstances of how history has been rewritten by the Sangh Parivar. So the topic of our fourth lecture of the first lecture series is Introduction to the History and Role of Women's Movement in India, for which we have Comrade Subhashini Ali with us as a guest speaker. Comrade Subhashini is the former Member of Parliament from Kanpur, the former President of All India Democratic Women's Association, AIDWA. So AIDWA is one of the largest women organizations in the country, having more than 1 crore members. Comrade Subhashini is one of the most powerful and asserting voices we have in the country, who has been mobilizing people and has played a crucial role in making AIDWA one of the most prominent organizations in the country. Beyond her profile as a former MP, she has worked dedicatedly on the issues of minorities across the nation for more than 4 decades. So yeah, so before I invite Comrade, I'll briefly explain the flow of the lecture. The lecture will be about 45 to 50 minutes, after which we will be taking questions for about 15 to 20 minutes. And the complete lecture series will be uploaded on our social media. So stay updated, and over to you, Comrade. Yes.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a very forbidding task because it's a very huge, it's a huge sort of topic that I have to deal with. It is the introduction to the women's movement and also the role that the women's movement has played in India. So it's a very vast topic, and I hope I can do justice to it. Of course, many things will be left out. So maybe we can have discussions in the future, or you can take up certain reading lists and learn more about it, because it's impossible in 50 minutes to cover the whole range that this subject actually requires. So what I'd like to say is that if we look at the women's movement in India, there are two distinct kinds of women's movement. I'm sorry. On the one hand, we have major women's organizations which have come out of the freedom movement itself. They owe their origin, they owe their activity, they owe their leadership. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you, but your camera has turned off.
No, it's not turned off. There's something has happened. So I don't understand what has happened. Yeah,
we can.
Okay, so we can broadly say that there are two major streams of the women's movement. And one is, of course, the stream that owes its existence and its inspiration and its values to the freedom movement itself. And most of those who belong to that stream and were the pioneers of this stream were all participants in the freedom movement in one way or the other. And the other stream is what I would call the Sangh Parivar stream, which also we cannot ignore certainly, because vast numbers of women are part of it and are also influenced by it and are mobilized by it for various different campaigns and attacks and movements. So usually the practice was earlier that we would only talk about the first stream that I have mentioned and described, because that was the stream that came out of the freedom movement that challenged patriarchy, that challenged class oppression, that challenged caste oppression, talked about gender equality, etc., etc. And that is what most people associate with what a women's movement is all about, especially in India. But today, we have to also take note of this other stream, which, as I said, is is influenced by the Sangh Parivar, has been created by the Sangh Parivar, and plays a very important role in mobilizing support for the campaigns of the Sangh Parivar. So we'll talk about the first stream first. Now, here we have organizations like the All India Women's Conference, which was an umbrella women's organization, which was founded in 1927. Margaret Cousins, who was very much a supporter of the freedom movement in India, was one of its founders. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur was very much part of it, and all the big names of the women in the freedom movement, like Sarojini Naidu, Ammu Swaminathan, etc., etc., were all part of the All India Women's Conference. And also women belonging to the left and women belonging to the socialist groups. All of them were also part of this wide umbrella organization, which was the All India Women's Conference. But they also had their own, maybe state level organizations about which I will be speaking. So this All India Women's Conference took up major issues concerning women in India. Because we have to understand the times that we are talking about. The 1927, when patriarchy ruled the roost, when even something which seems today to be so obvious, that is raising the marriageable age from, say, 12, earlier it was even 9, was a big battle, when education for women and accessing education for women was a big battle, etc. So the All India Women's Conference took up these issues. They started an educational institution like the Lady Irwin College. They were very much involved in the movement to raise the marriageable age for women. They were also involved in the movement for widow remarriage, against sati, against the most vicious practices that had been very much part of what women were subjected to in India. So they did play an important role in the early years in taking up these issues and challenging what was being promoted in the name of religion, in the name of tradition, in the name of texts, holy texts. And of course, these are not restricted just to the Hindu community, but the other communities in India also had a lot of, they were also very much under the influence of regressive practices, which their community leaders also said were part of their religion or part of their tradition, and so on and so forth. So early years of the women's movement saw an organization like the All India Women's Conference center stage, a big umbrella organization, but with many different streams within it. But these were all streams which were part of the national movement, which were fighting for India's freedom, which were fighting against imperialism, fighting for an independent India, in which they believed that the rights and the freedom of women would also be guaranteed. That was one big reason for them being part of the independence movement in the first place and being able to draw other women into it. But this aspect of the women's movement was not the only one before independence, because already there were groups of women in West Bengal, in Maharashtra, in the Hyderabad state, and in Kerala, in different parts of the country. There were many, many women, especially they were women from the, say, communist stream. They were active members of either the Communist Party or they were close to the Communist Party. And they took up issues along with women's issues. They took up issues that were class issues. That is, they took up issues of exploitation of women workers. They took up issues of exploitation of women landless agricultural workers. They took up issues of women who were the most exploited, and they also tried to address the issue of caste and caste oppression. So they added a new dimension to the women's movement, which was, as I said, under this umbrella of the All India Women's Conference. And prominent among these organizations was the women's organization in West Bengal, which was known as the uh, known as the MA Mars, Mahila Atma Raksha Samiti. And that came into prominence, say, in the 30s and 40s. And many prominent names which remained associated with the, you can say, left women's movement, which was very powerful, emerged at that time. There was Kanak Mukherjee, who joined the salt satyagraha at the age of 10. There was Mani Kuntla ji, and there were Kalpana Dutt and Kulrenu Guha. All of these women who were part of the communist movement, but were very, very concerned about women's equality and women's oppression, they became the leaders of this Mahila Atma Raksha Samiti. And in fact, they also formed a girls' students organization. And in the first conference of this organization, they raised issues like domestic work, equality in the home, and issues that were really radical at that time. This was done by young communist women, students, etc. at that time. And they had traveled around India. They mobilized women in different parts of the country. And they, in Bengal itself, played a huge role during the terrible Bengal famine of 1942, when, the famine, of course, created this terrible hunger, but the famine also was responsible for women being trafficked, young children being sold, and so on and so forth. And volunteers from the Mahila Atma Raksha Samiti would stand in the ration queues. They would try to protect the women. They played a huge role in seeing that relief work was undertaken. They would go to the villages and they would speak against the prostitution and the trafficking that had become so common, and so on and so forth. And this same movement then became part of another very huge rural agrarian movement, which broke out just after the end of World War II. That was a time after the war ended when jobs were lost, when prices of everything increased, when foodstuffs became very scarce, and people and poor people were subjected to very terrible conditions of, of real starvation and deprivation. At that time, after having worked for the famine relief and so on, and also having got involved with working for communal harmony and brotherhood, because the movement for Pakistan and division of the country was also becoming strong. And of course, in Bengal, we know that there was a lot of communal conflict between Hindus and Muslims also. So these women of this Mahila Atma Raksha Samiti were also very active in trying to promote communal harmony. But in just after 1945, a huge movement broke out in the villages of Bengal, both what is East Bengal and West Bengal. And this was a movement of the small tenant farmers and the landless peasantry, who were demanding that 2/3 of the crop should stay with them. This was the famous Tibhaga movement. And very soon, actually, women became the leaders of this movement. All these women that I have mentioned to you, they were definitely very big leaders of this movement. But other than them, poor women from Dalit communities, from landless agricultural labor communities also became very important in this movement. And one woman's name which stands out is Bimala Maji, who was from a very poor family, landless family. She had faced terrible oppression in her own private life, but she became a leader of the Tibhaga movement, and she would move along with the other women and rouse the rural women to hold on to their crops and even go to the landlords' homes and break open into their granaries, distribute the crop, and also go and stop the threshing on the threshing floors in the landlords' homes. I mean, a very, very militant woman. And then towards the end of the movement, at the time of independence, in fact, she was arrested and kept in a cage for about a month. And, people used to come and look at her. And then she was freed only a couple of years after Indian independence. So this was one very major movement that developed a strong women's movement in West Bengal, which had all these elements of fighting against class and caste oppression, also along with the fight against patriarchy and the fight for gender equality. And I would like to say that this period, immediately after the Second World War, saw the outbreak of huge struggles of the working class and even more the poor peasantry, the tenants, and the agricultural workers in 3 or 4 states in India. And what are the most famous instances of these struggles are the Punapra Vayalar struggle in Kerala, the Telangana armed struggle for land and for rights of the landless against landlordism and against Nizam Shahi in that part of Andhra, which was Telangana at that time. And also in Maharashtra, 2 kinds of struggles broke out. One was militant working class struggles in cities like Mumbai, where the workers also came out on the streets to support the RIN mutineers, that is the sailors. And in fact, they blocked the streets, the workers and many women who belonged to an organization called Shramik Mahila Sangh, women like Vimal Randire, Kamal Dhonde, Ahilya Ranganekar, who faced British bullets and stood at the barricades, trying to stop the military from going and attacking the sailors. And simultaneously with this, there was the big Warli revolt. That was the revolt of the Warli tribals, which was led by Godavari Parulekar, also a communist leader. In Telangana, so many names are there, starting with Ailamma, who was a landless woman who, in a way, threw the first stone of that struggle. But thousands of women participated in this very brutal and very militant, the brutality that was meted out to these women by the landlords and their goons, by the Nizam and the Razakars, and later on by the Indian Army soldiers that went in to make Hyderabad part of the Indian Union, is unimaginable. The barbarity is unimaginable. And the bravery of the women who stood up to this barbarity and who refused to compromise is also amazing. They fought to save the land that they had taken away from the landlords. They fought against oppression. They fought to protect their brothers and husbands and sons who were also part of the movement. And they were actually the most fearless fighters of this struggle. People like Comrade Sundaraya have written about it, and they have talked about they've described, like, for example, there was a washerwoman who was supporting the movement, and she was hung from a tree naked and, left there. But she survived and she didn't leave the movement. And, women were tortured in every imaginable way, so on and so forth. And of course, big leaders emerged from this movement. Of the biggest and most well-known name is that of Swarajam, but there were many others. And all these women went on to become leaders of the women's movement in that part of India, and then later on uh, of the Indian women's movement also. So this was in that part of India. Then we come to the Varli revolt in Maharashtra. I've already talked about the working class struggle. And the Varli revolt was in the district of Thane, where Comrade Godavari Parulekar organized the Varli tribals, and the women were again in the forefront of the struggle for wages and for human treatment, at which they were just denied by the landlords and the big owners of the orchards in that area. And then the other huge struggle of that period was the Punapra Vayala struggle. That part of Travancore was not part of British India. It was ruled by an Indian Raja, and his Diwan was in fact wanting to not merge with the Indian Union. He had other ideas, and he unleashed a wave of repression on those who were struggling for freedom. In this area of Alapura, where Punapra Vailar is, it was a stronghold of choir workers. And many of the choir workers were women. And they, in fact, went to the villages, they went to the rural areas, they supported the struggle for freedom and against landlordism, against terrible feudal oppression. And many of them were actually killed in this struggle. And many of them became, as I said, leaders of the women's movement also. One name is that of Medini, who came from possibly a Dalit family. She was only 8 years old at the time, but she had a wonderful voice. She became the voice of the movement. She used to sing at the meetings. She used to inspire people and mobilize them. Now, the common features of these big struggles against feudal oppression is that the women were subjected to different kinds of oppression at that time. They were completely at the mercy of the feudal landlords, whether it is Telangana, whether it is the Varli tribal women, whether it is the women in Punapra, Vayalar, whether it is the women of Bengal, all of them spoke about the sexual oppression to which they were subjected. All of them spoke about the fact that they were fighting for their honor. They were fighting for land, they were fighting for wages, but they were also fighting for their honor. They were fighting for justice. They were fighting for equality. This was a very important component to the women's movement that these huge struggles added. Also, many issues that we are still talking about today were raised in the course of these struggles. Women would say in Telangana, for example, how can we fight if we are also supposed to do all the housework? Why is it that we are criticized more than the men are criticized? The question of equality in marriage, the question of unhappy, abusive marriages, and the right to opt out of them, to choose another life partner. All these issues were also raised in the course of these struggles. So, as I said, these struggles that broke out just at the end of the World War, especially in rural areas of Bengal, Kerala, Telangana, and Maharashtra. And also, they found their echoes in many other parts of India. I can't speak about all of them, but in Awadh, Uttar Pradesh, also there were big rural kind of uprisings in Sholapur in Maharashtra, and in Tripura. This is the time when the tribals came out struggling against their Raja and for their own rights against the worst kind of landlordism and feudal oppression. So this was a time when huge movements in which communist women, and very large numbers of the poorest women, that is the landless women of the rural areas, came out and fought against feudal oppression, raised questions of gender equality, raised questions of equality in the family, raised questions about sexual assault, and also questions related to wages, related to land, and so on and so forth. So these struggles added a different and a new dimension to the women's movement that we had seen started around the uh, 20s, raising the issues of women's education against practices like sati and child marriage, etc. So these later struggles in which communist women were very active, in which communist women's organizations were active, out of which more women's organizations led by communist women emerged. These struggles added new dimensions of class, caste oppression to the women's movement and raised very basic issues of women's equality, of the fight against patriarchy, patriarchal norms, against casteism, and against class oppression. So, this is, I think, important for us to remember because the questions that were raised then have not been, those issues have not yet been resolved. Even today, the women's movement is grappling with all these issues. Though we got freedom, although we got a constitution which promised equality to women, although in a piecemeal fashion, the Hindu Code Bill was also passed. And of course, we know that women from the All India Women's Conference, AIWC, and the communist women in different states were spearheading the struggle to pass the Hindu Code Bill, supporting Dr. Ambedkar in his huge effort to bring reform to the Hindu community and give Hindu women their rights. But at this time, we also see that the women belonging to the Hindu right, because what happened was that, the RSS was formed in 1925. And in 1936, the Rashtriya Sevika Sangh was formed. That is the women's wing of the RSS. Now you can see in the difference in the names, the kind of status that women have in the Hindu right. The men's organization is called Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. That means it's a national organization of volunteers. Whereas the women's organization is called Rashtriya Sevika Sangh. That means it is an organization of women who are performing service. They are in service, they are sevikas. So you can see from the very beginning, the kind of attitude that the Hindu right has towards women and their role. And the Rashtriya Sevika Sangh also had as one of its mottos, Matritva, means motherhood. So motherhood was considered to be one of the three most important aspects of women's status or a woman's life. Other than that, there was, patriotism and service, but matrit, that means motherhood. And also, this organization was confined to Hindu women. Only Hindu women could become members. And to begin with, it was very much an upper caste women's organization. We see the names of the leaders and most of the members, they belong to the upper caste. But this organization, at the time when the constitution was being framed and when the Hindu Code Bill was being, as I said, implemented piecemeal, there were huge debates around it. The women belonging to this organization actually took a stand against any reform in Hindu law. They took a stand against granting of equal rights to Hindu women. This is something that is very important for us to remember, because today, when the Sangh Parivar talks about Muslim women's rights and how they are fighting against the unilateral talaq and so on and so forth, we have to remember that when it came to the struggle for the rights of Hindu women, they were opposed to it. They were opposed to equality for Hindu women. So this organization that was started in 1936 was not a very powerful organization to begin with, but it certainly did grow and it certainly remained influential within our Indian society. Now, what happened to the women's movement that came out of the national movement is that most of the leftist women left the All India Women's Conference after independence and formed the NFIW, the National say, of National Federation of Indian Women, NFIW, was formed in 1954, and all the big communist women's names that we have been mentioning, they all were part of the NFIW. And why did they leave? Because after independence, the AIWC was no longer interested in fighting government policies. They became more of an adjunct to Congress Party and the governments that the Congress Party was running. And they didn't see their role as being one of fighting and struggling against the policies of this government. So in that situation, these other leftist women and many of the organizations that they were part of left the AIWC and formed the NFIW. And they remained very active, uh, taking up the issue of women's rights, equality for women, and also, as I said, the class issues that we have mentioned earlier. They continued to agitate around those issues. Now, this continued for some time. And then, we had the emergency and all of that. And after that emergency, a very important case occurred, which was the rape of a 12-year-old tribal girl, Mathura, in a police station in Maharashtra. And she was raped by the policemen in the Thana, but they were acquitted by the court that said that she had no signs on her body of struggle, and therefore she was not raped and it was consensual. So this led to a huge united movement, and many streams, that is the left streams, the AIWC, many NGOs that had started by that time, many smaller women's groups, they call themselves autonomous groups and so on, all came together on this question of Mathura's rape. And this was a very important moment in the women's movement because it set the stage for united women's action on specific issues. And this was one of them. And changes were made later on because, the Janata Party government came, Congress was defeated, and women like Ahilya Ranganekar and Sushila Gopalan became members of parliament 2 years later. And they started a very big battle as members of parliament to change and reform the laws dealing with rape and dowry. And that is when many important legal changes were made. For example, in the case of custodial rape, the onus for proving innocence was shifted to the perpetrator, saying that in that situation of custodial rape, the perpetrator is in a position of power, greater power, vis-a-vis the victim. And so therefore, in such cases, he has to prove that he is innocent. Also, the rape of any sexual relationship or any sexual act with a minor was automatically deemed to be rape and to be punishable as rape. So important changes in the rape law were made at that time, and certainly all this gave a great impetus to the United Women's Movement, which from that time till we can say the 90s was actually very active as a united movement on many issues, including the issue of growing communalism. And it was at this time that another very important event took place, and that was in 1981. The All India Democratic Women's Association was formed in Chennai, and many of the communist leaders, women leaders like Ahilya Ranganekar, Vimal Rantive, Sushila Gopalan, Lakshmi Sehgal, and important leaders from West Bengal, Kanak Mukherjee and others, all became leaders of the founding leaders of the All India Democratic Women's Association. And many of the organizations that they had been working in at the state level, like the Shramik Mahila Sangh, like the Kerala organization, the Tripura organization, Istri Sabha in Punjab, etc., they also merged with the All India Democratic Women's Association. And I feel that the AIDWA played a very, very seminal role in giving new directions to the women's movement as a whole. And it's important to uh, understand this and realize this, because for one thing, AIDWA was very clear about the fact that it was not a communist women's organization. There were many communist leaders who were part of it, but they were not, the membership was not communist. It was a mass organization of women. Number two, in a time of increasing NGOization, it was never an NGO. It did not rely on either the government or the corporate sector for funding. It did not go in for project work to get funding. It was an independent women's mass organization which collected funds from its sympathizers and its members, which had a membership which was renewed every year and expanded every year. So it was a mass organization of a different kind, was certainly not an NGO. So therefore, it could fight government policy. It could, launch mass struggles of women, and so on and so forth. So it played an extremely important role in the 80s and the 90s, taking up issues of equality of women. I mean, the Shah Bano case and the problem of communalization, communal polarization, but also it took up issues of Dalit women as the most oppressed of all women, because AIDWA had an understanding that while all women are oppressed, the oppression of all women is not equal. Some women are more oppressed than other women. And certainly among women in India, it is the Dalit women who face the most oppression. It also took up the issue of women and class oppression, that women workers suffer from class oppression. And all women also as citizens, they also suffer from discrimination. So woman as citizen, woman as worker, and woman as woman, all these aspects were taken up by AIDWA to expand the understanding of what were the issues that the women's movement should engage with, and what were the different ways in which the problems of women in India were to be addressed. The other important thing was that AIDWA took the lead for trying to ensure the widest possible unity among women's organizations on various issues. And this was very important in the period I've just talked about, because many, many joint movements were launched at this time on a variety of issues. Because this is also the period, someone has raised this question, when neoliberal reforms were introduced in India. And I am proud to say that it was the All India Democratic Women's Association that was the first and the earliest to talk about these reforms as leading to greater oppression, greater inequality, and greater discrimination. Because agencies like the World Bank, many NGOs, and many other well-meaning people thought that freeing the Indian economy, neoliberal reforms would allow women to emerge in many fields, to enter many fields, and would create opportunities for them to actually go forward. Whereas it was AIDWA that said, no, this is absolutely wrong. Yes, you may see more employed women, but they will be getting the least paid and most insecure forms of employment. And down the line, women are going to be the worst victims of these neoliberal reforms, because neoliberal reforms means the government is abdicating its social responsibility. So when the government abdicates its social responsibility, not only do the socially deprived suffer the most, but it is women on whom greater and greater burdens and responsibilities are going to be placed. If the government moves out of healthcare, it will be either ill-paid women or unpaid women who will be then performing those responsibilities. And similarly, when the government moves out of education, education is privatized, then women's entry into education, access to education is certainly going to be affected. And lower paid women, lowly paid women, and unpaid women are going to have to also carry the burden of educating their children, and so on and so forth. And what we said in 1991, when we had a series of seminars on the subject of neoliberalism and its adverse impact on the status of women, what we said then, what we took to the Beijing conference, what we tried to convince the broader movement about then, of course, was accepted by the women's movement largely, and is now accepted all around, that the whole neoliberal paradigm is meant to increase exploitation, increase profiteering, and has led to greater inequality within nations, between nations, and within nations between different sections of people among the exploited. The most exploited have now become the most unequal. The gaps are increasing every day. So this was a very important contribution that AIDWA made to the whole debate around neoliberal reforms. And we were able to launch many struggles on our own with other organizations and with other women's organizations on different aspects of the implementation and the adverse impact of these reforms. So now this brings us up to, say, the mid 1990s. And here we see a very great change occurring in our polity. And we see the rise of the Hindutva forces. We think of them as Manuvadi Hindutva forces because they are not for any religious group. Of course, they are using religion, but they are also using Manuvadi understanding to attack the rights of women, attacks of Dalits, attacks of Adivasis, and of course the attacks of minorities, and along with them, the rights of all the working people. So we've seen the rise of this Manuvadi Hindutva from the early 90s, and now, of course, our movement and all that we have fought for is today terribly threatened by this rise, and all the gains that Indian women have made after great sacrifice now are endangered, because one after another, all our rights are actually being encroached upon by a government that is guided by the RSS, has a Manuvadi Hindutva agenda, and wants to actually work within the constitutional framework to destroy the constitution and all the rights that it confers on us. So this is the situation in which we are today. So when we talk about, some friends have asked, what about different sections and so on? See, what has happened, not only has the Hindu right obviously gained in strength, and the women's organizations belonging to the Hindu right, whether it is the Rashtriya Sevika Sangh or a new organization like the Durga Vahini, which is a militant Hindu women's organization, which I think was born in 1991, and they have played a role in riots, they have played a role in the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, they have played a role in the demolition of the mosque and in riots ever since then. So they have been they have gained, they are gaining strength and gaining numbers. Their ability to mobilize is also now growing. And because the government is coming down so heavily on any kind of criticism, so many organizations are no longer taking a firm stand for rights and against the policies of the government, because either their funding makes them very, very vulnerable. We are seeing the government coming down very heavily, using FCRA against so many NGOs, against so many activists. And also, this era of neoliberal reforms has also seen the rise of identity politics. And there are many organizations now which are confined to Dalits or to tribals or to Muslims or to some other social or religious group rather than all women. And many reasons are given to justify this. But what it does do is it also fragments the United Women's Movement. It also fragments the women's struggle for their rights and for their for going forward towards complete equality. But despite all this, even in these very difficult times, we are constantly trying to keep the idea of united struggle alive. And we have been, of course, along with other women's organizations, come to common understanding on many issues, but also many NGOs who are working on different aspects of women's problems have been coming together with us. And Dalit women's organizations, some Muslim women's organizations, some tribal women's organizations, tribal much less, have also been coming along with us, or we have been going along with them on common issues. But it is now a very, very difficult struggle. It's a very bitter struggle because the attack on rights across the board is now there for everyone to see. And there is a fear that people fighting for their rights will be victimized by the government. So in this situation, we have to think of new strategies, new ways of coming together and combating anti-women, anti-people policies of the government. So that is the real challenge before us today, at a time when women affiliated to the Sangh Parivar are also gaining in strength, are being given every kind of help, monetary and otherwise, to expand and spread their very vicious communal divisive ideology among masses of Indian women. So here I would like to say that once again, when we have to confront this situation, we once again get a lot of inspiration from the freedom struggle and from the struggles that I've described, in which women have fought so bravely and have undergone such terrible suffering in fights against feudal oppression, sexual exploitation, caste oppression, and so on. What they went through, actually, we have not had to experience. So we have to learn from that, get courage from that, and take the movement for women's equality forward.
Thank you so much, comrade, for like the
I think
lecture.
I'm just about within my time also.
Yes. So we have time for the questions. Yeah, so there are quite a few questions. I'll start with the first question. I'll just take it up. Yeah, so Megha asks, how are women's lives in rural India impacted by the neoliberal order? What are the issues where interventions can be made by women's movement in India? This is the first question.
See, we all know that India is in the throes of an agrarian crisis. And what does that mean? That means that even farmers were quite prosperous earlier. They are also not able to break even now. The problem of indebtedness, the problem of not getting a fair price for crops. All this is, of course, impacting women in the rural area the most. If they're from landless families, they are losing work. They are getting even lower wages than they got earlier. They are having to do many kinds of work just to stay alive. They are having to even do, say, 24-hour migration. Or you know that women are having their uteruses removed so that they don't have their periods, and they go to work in the sugarcane fields. They go from Maharashtra to work in the sugarcane fields of Gujarat. So what I'm trying to say is that the whole agrarian crisis, which is very much a result of the neoliberal policies, is impacting in a very cruel way on the lives of women in the rural areas. Now, if we take the question of suicides due to indebtedness, so many women are also committing suicide, but women are not recognized as being farmers. They get not even the very limited uh, kinds of help or aid or compensation that men farmers get from the government, because they're not even recognized as being farmers. So if a woman farmer commits suicide, she will not, the family would get no compensation. If she is practicing agriculture, she will not get any help in the form of seeds or fertilizer or loans or a subsidy. And therefore, every way in which rural uh, farmers who are males and rural agricultural laborers are, we're hearing about their problems. You have to understand that the women are having them in a much more severe degree. Also, huge numbers of women have been thrown out of employment, both in the rural areas and in the urban areas also. But in the rural areas, there is just no work. They're just going around looking for any kind of work, ready to work for any kind of a wage or even food grains. And the MNREGA work that was available and should have been increased, and the wages that should have been increased, they are suffering because the wages are not being paid on time. The government is cutting allocations, and now the government is bringing in all kinds of new rules to stop the access or to limit the access of women to even MNREGA work. So this desperate situation of women exists there in the rural areas, which of course will lead to more trafficking, which will lead to more child marriages, which will lead to more all-round oppression and exploitation of women. Yes,
Yes,
your mic
sorry,
is,
my
yeah,
network is a
yeah,
bit
that's
low.
okay.
Yeah, so I switched off my camera. So we have another question, but you've answered the question on caste, religion, and so on and so forth. So I think we can skip that.
Yeah, well, I want to
The
say
next,
here that what is happening in, and this is very much part of neoliberalism also. That means neoliberalism promotes the market as the final arbiter of society. It is the market that decides what human relations should be. It is the market that decides how we think, what we believe in, how we marry, how we don't marry, how our marriages are conducted, and so on and so forth, all to gain and earn more and more profit for the market. Now, people think that this is a very far-fetched idea, but it is not so. If you look at TV, which I don't, but you see so many advertisements are around a girl's marriage. That means if a girl is to marry, then so many things have to be bought to ensure that she has a happy marriage, that she gets respect in her marital home. That means that the additions to the expenses of a girl's marriage are just being increased every day to help the market, to increase the profitability of the market. It's a very important point to understand. Now, when this happens, obviously, the girl gets devalued. If her value is increased by adding goods and adding all kinds of gifts to her as a bride, that means that intrinsically her own value is being diminished. So the market gains by the intrinsic value of a woman being diminished. And so therefore the market does everything in its power to diminish the value and the status of women. It's a very important point to understand. Now look at advertisements in a new way. For example, you see an advertisement of a boy's family has come to see the girl's family. And Amitabh Bachchan is standing behind the pillar of the room and saying, the walls of this house, they're so in such bad shape, they need paint, they're cracking. I don't think this match is going to be made, because girl is wonderful, she's beautiful, she's a gold medalist, and she's a good cook, but her house is so shabby that this match is not going to happen. So what should be done? Paint should be brought The walls should be given a new coat of paint. The house should start shining. And then the boy's mother will also start smiling and say, yes, 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 I think let us decide on the dates. So, what are you telling people? That it doesn't matter if the girl is beautiful, highly intelligent, a very good cook. None of this matters if the walls of a home are unpainted. So, a tub of paint has more value than a girl, and the cost of the paint is also added to her wedding expenses. And in all of this, obviously, the value of the girl herself, the prospective bride herself, is brought down. It is diminished. So this is what we have to understand, that this market, which is now so strong because of neoliberal reforms, it promotes every kind of anti-woman thought, every kind of anti-woman tradition, every kind of anti-woman belief, because it helps the market to keep the value of women down, so that goods have to be added to her value in order to make her marriageable. I think this is something that many of us have not really thought about very seriously, but it is something that we should think about and talk about and really oppose. And that's why we are seeing superstition, religious fanaticism, all increasing. The whole media is doing nothing else but promoting these things because it helps the market ultimately. It also helps the party in power now. That's the recent development of the last 6, 7 years. But it also helps the market. And so that's why you're seeing only this in the electronic media and nothing else.
That's true. So we have another question by Zeba. She writes, can you elaborate further? How has AIDWA contributed to the feminist movement in the country?
This is like asking at the end of the Ramayana, who was Ram? What did they do? I think I've spoken at length about it. If she listens to it again, I don't
Yeah.
need to repeat all that.
Yeah, right. Okay. So Ahalya asks, according to you, what are the various steps we can carry out to promote and instill gender sensitization and the impact it can have in the present times?
Well, I think I have hinted at many things that we should do. We should talk about class oppression. We should talk about caste oppression. We should give examples. We should talk about the way minorities are being oppressed. But we should also say that it's not enough for each of these groups to think that they can fight their battles on their own. That's not going to help. That's not going to succeed. That's what identity politics does. It fragments struggles. It fragments the oppressed people. It fragments the working class. It, in fact, takes away the whole concept of class and therefore weakens struggles against the whole system of oppression that we are facing today. So while we become conscious of different kinds of oppression and different kinds of exploitation, we have to understand that only common struggles can take us forward.
So the next question is, how is the Indian feminism different from Western feminism? And is Indian feminism in today an attempt to intimate Western feminism?
Imitate.
Imitate, sorry.
No, no, I think we should not be talking about this feminism and that feminism. What our understanding of feminism is that feminism projects the view that men are the enemies of women. And that's a very easy view to adopt. But where does it take you? Where does it lead you to? What we feel is that yes, there is gender oppression, there's patriarchy, but there's also class oppression, caste oppression, and the state plays a very important role. It is the state that enables patriarchy to get strengthened. It is the state that enables caste and class oppression and strengthen them. So the state cannot be let off the hook. It is the state that we have to fight against. And of course, within the family, we have to demand equality, we have to demand democracy, we have to talk about unpaid labor of the women. All these issues are very important. But to think that our battle ends men against women, then where is this battle going to? Where is this battle taking us to? And how is this battle going to end exploitation, discrimination, and caste oppression? These are the big things that we have to talk about. So I don't pose Western feminism against Indian feminism. I think that feminism itself, by reducing the fight of women to a fight against men, is a dead end, doesn't take us forward. It doesn't, uh, it doesn't really bring all the aspects of women's exploitation together for an effective struggle. Of course, the West is different. They don't have caste. They have other problems. They have other things. So they have to figure out what their problems are in different countries and fight against them. We have to figure out in our country. But internationally, there are common problems. Imperialism is a very big problem for all women. Imperialist attacks, imperialist wars are a very big question for women all over the world. Imperialist intervention in markets, imperialist capture of markets, imperialist exploitation. These are also definitely issues for women all over the world. So there are common issues as well as specific issues. And we have to study them and we have to work out strategies to deal with them.
Right. So then it's the second part of the question. You have clearly emphasized the importance of collaboration between women's movement and the trade union movement, anti-caste movements.
And the
Nowadays,
youth movement and the students movement and the
right.
anti-caste movement
Yeah.
and the anti-communal movement.
So nowadays, it has become fashionable to separate women's movements, women's struggles from the questions of class and caste. How can we bring all together to a larger unity and struggle?
See that you have to think of what is a woman.
Mm.
How can you think of a woman without class, without caste? I mean, I don't understand what women you're talking about then. And without religion. The most exploited women in our country are who? The minority women, scheduled caste women, tribal women. How can you separate these aspects of women's exploitation from the problems of women as a whole?
So we'll take Rakendu's question next. What are the major challenges faced by AIDWA in mobilizing other autonomous feminist organizations towards the working class movements?
I wouldn't call them economists. That's a wrong term. See, there are many different kinds of women's organizations, but many of them, they would talk about poor women. They would talk about, say, Dalit women. They may not talk about working class women, but that doesn't mean that they are to be kept out of the movement. What is the problem today in mobilization is fear. There is such a fear of government oppression, of government attacks, that there's a fear among women in coming forward, especially women belonging to funded organizations. They are very vulnerable to government pressure.
So we'll take the last question.
Okay.
Namrata asks, what role do you think does literature play in bringing the issues faced by women from the domestic sphere into the larger discourse? Did the regional women's movement influence literary works or vice versa?
Well, I really don't know too much about this, but I know that in India, literacy among women is very limited. When we talk about literacy among women, it means they can sign their names. That's a literate woman. But I don't know. This is something to be discussed. What do we mean by literature? What kind of literature? When we talk about epics, when we talk about myths, they're also anti-women in many ways. So then there are myths about heroic women also, which do inspire women. So I don't think you can generalize that literature does this or literature doesn't do this. There's literature and literature and literature. And different kinds of literature obviously have very different kinds of effects on women. Unfortunately, traditional forms of literature, that is kathas and the big epics and all that, I feel that they have a lot of anti-women sentiment and anti-women things to say, actually.
So I think the other questions you've already answered, so we can leave that.
No, I
Yeah.
don't think one can answer to that way. One can just try to raise some issues, try to start thinking in a certain way, like this whole literature thing. I mean, I'm sure in more literate societies, certain kinds of literature may be very inspiring for women in the movement. And now there's, of course, feminist writing. A lot of women are writing. A lot of what has been written by women is now being rediscovered, republished, translated. So I'm sure that is having its own effect. But how much effect it's having, and can it counter the effect of what is traditional epics and kathas and all that? I'm not really in a position to say. That is something that we have to go much deeper into, and different parts of India will have very different stories to tell about this.
Okay, then I think we can stop taking the questions. We've passed the time as well. So
Okay.
yes, yeah. So thank you, comrade, for explaining on the role of women movement so detailedly, along with the significance of mass movement across different states, regions, and for the emancipation of women in regard to the historical discourse, which continues and persists even today in regard to the
It's getting
status.
worse now.
Yeah. Yes.
It's under attack. All our rights are under attack.
Yes. So yes, thank you so much, comrade. Thank you for your time. And yes, we have another lecture which is planned tomorrow. That is.
I would just like to add one thing. We talk
Yes,
about
comrade.
Indian women and other women. Can I take 5 minutes? Or is that you're
Comrade,
out
sure.
of time?
No. It's
See,
fine.
okay. One thing that I've not talked about, but it's something to consider. You see, the caste system itself is very imprisoning of women, because a woman's movements, her choices are circumscribed by the caste system. She has to keep the caste system going. If she marries out of the caste, especially if she marries below her own caste, she is threatening the caste system. And that is why the circumscribing of women, the taking away of their many freedoms and their freedom in choosing their life partner is such an important battle in our country. So when we talk about caste, it's not just Dalit women who are being oppressed by the caste system and say backward caste. It's all women who are being imprisoned by this Varnashram Dharma, because it negates their exercise of choice. This is, I think, also one aspect that we have to grapple with in India very much.
Right. In fact, we have tomorrow itself, we have the introduction to the history and role of anti-caste movement in India. So, but anyway, thank you so much, comrade. And thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll see you another time. And thank you for everyone who has joined us today. All the 5 lectures of the first lecture series will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, and we will update on our social media as in when we do it. So yes, join us for tomorrow as well. And thank you so much, comrade. Have a good evening.
Thank you all very much, and I hope we can maybe carry this discussion further, that you will also take something from this and study different aspects in greater detail. Thank you very much.
Yes, definitely. This is an introductory lecture, so we hope to. This is like what we are trying to do.
Okay, great.